Hi, everyone. Welcome to Black Hat 2015. Thank you so much for being here. Couple quick announcements. There will be a reception tonight in the business hall at 5:30. The business hall is located in Shoreline A room. The Pony Awards will be taking place tonight in Mandalay Bay BCD room at 6 p.m. And you are currently in Mandalay Bay GH for the session Big Game Hunting, the Peculiarities of Nation-State Malware Research with Morgan Marquis-Boer and Marion Marszalek. Thank you so much, and please make sure to silence your cell phones. Enjoy the talk.
Thank you.
Awesome. Cheers. Great. Look, sounds like we're live. So, welcome to Big Game Hunting, Peculiarities in Nation-State Malware Research. I'm Morgan Marquis-Boer, and I'm currently the Director of Security at First Look Media, and I'm also a researcher at the Citizen Lab at the University of Toronto.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marion Marszalek. I'm a senior malware researcher at a US startup named Cyford, and today I'm very happy to be part of the probably most diverse Black Hat talk in history. We're here today, a female speaker and a dark-skinned speaker. We're very sad to miss our third part.
Unfortunately, Claudio couldn't make it today. We are all Claudio. So, yeah, we've got a lot to get through, so we should probably get on with it. So we're going to talk about the peculiarities in nation-state malware research today. So we'll kind of talk a bit about the rise of threat intelligence, how the AV industry sort of transitioned to that, and some of the practices. We'll talk about a novel approach in binary attribution and some of the more unpleasant side effects of being targets of espionage. We'll cover lies that vendors tell and when things actually get bizarrely personal. I'm not sure Twitter has been the best for our industry. And then at the end, because you're all going to be experts on this topic, we're going to kind of have a choose-your-own-adventure, analyze along with us nation-state malware session. But in order to lend a bit of context to all of this, some of you might remember back in sort of early 2010 when Google announced that they'd been hacked by China. The hack occurred in 2009, but a lot of the narrative that sort of happened over the next 6 months or so was, we learned that it wasn't just Google that was hacked by China, that Silicon Valley had been hacked by China. And then, we kind of learned that everybody had been hacked by China. And there was a lot of sort of chest beating and finger wagging and, China, how could you hack our beloved Silicon Valley companies? We're very angry with you. And then, of course, we learned that it wasn't just China that was hacking everybody. Some of you guys might remember an incident at the beginning of mid-2010, 2011. Stuxnet was discovered, the world's first digital cyber weapon. And this was allegedly a joint effort by the US and Israel to sabotage Iran's nuclear program. This actually led to a whole family of sort of Israeli malware falling out. Kaspersky called it the tilted platform. I think we had Dooku as well, Gauss. Attribution is tricky, right? But so they called it the tilted platform because of the tendency of the malware to create temp files that started with a tilde D. More recently, the malware used by the allegedly British government called Regin was outed. The Snowden documents revealed that the GCHQ had hacked telecommunications provider Belgacom and also the European Union. And, a variety of people released analysis on this, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about it later.
And as it turns out, British intelligence hasn't been the only European intelligence service being active on the nation-state malware sector. Just recently, interesting documents were leaked by Edward Snowden, published by the Spiegel in Germany, revealing that the French government was also using espionage tools to spy on institutions in the Middle East.
Right, so most recently you probably remember that Kaspersky produced a big report around Equation, which is sort of allegedly the NSA's malware. The sort of the takeaway from this is that everybody's hacking everybody all the time, or at least all of the big countries are sort of using hacking as a tool of espionage, and the smaller countries wish that they were. We also learned some other interesting things. WikiLeaks released the spy files in 2011-12. This was sort of a series of promotional materials from conferences where sort of surveillance equipment and capability was sold. From these, we learned that Hacking Team, Finn Fisher, and Vupian were selling exploits and implants and Trojans and that sort of thing. And, then over the next few years, we learned that actually everybody was selling exploits and implants and Trojans. Someone tried to sell me some at the door. So what this has actually meant for the sort of the state of the industry is that, for anyone who has wandered the vendor hall, or in fact is even staying in this hotel, I woke up in the morning and there was a tag on my door which said, "You need more threat intelligence." And so this has actually kind of led from sort of AV, which was sort of once the red-headed stepchild of the security scene. Like, malware wasn't actually very cool, only sort of AV has rebranded itself as threat intel. So we call it AV 2.0 because some of you are probably familiar with the Web 2.0 statement that if you're not paying for the software, then you are the product. Well, AV 2.0 has managed to do one better. You're the product, and you're still paying for their software.
This is kind of strange, right? So let me tell you about myself a bit. I grew up in antivirus, so that's how I started on malware and watched it become the threat intelligence industry. But how did that happen, and why are the customers the product? So we see some very, very interesting shifts. The most peculiar shift I perceived in the past few years was the malware detection has kind of transitioned to malware watching. So still our security products try to stop malware and try to detect it and detain it, but what is also happening is that our security products are nowadays watching malware, trying to gather telemetry data and intelligence about what the malware is doing, where it comes from, who operated, who wrote it, and who else is affected by the same kind of malware. So imagine like something like a robbery at a house. So what we see in the threat intel industry is an ongoing robbery. You have a house that is being breached by thieves who are going in, stealing stuff, and going out again. In the real world, this will be stopped. The thieves will be detained. In threat intelligence industry, security companies are watching these thieves going into company networks, watching the thieves spreading in the company network, watching the thieves dragging data off the company network. And then they're like investigating, where did the thieves come from? Why did the thieves steal exactly what they stole? What was the intention of the thieves? Were the thieves after other targets as well? And then they write a report about why the thieves were following the targets. So if you compare this with the threat intel with the real world, you see there's something weird going on, right? So we have this, in fact, malware watching. We have actor tracking. In threat intel, we're very interested who our actors are. And another peculiar thing in this industry is that all of a sudden actors and their malware and their intentions are very good publicity for the companies who actually detect this kind of activity. So we have our famous malwares being numbered, being tagged with names, being tagged with logos. And the most interesting part of this is probably the precious treasures, as I call it, the highly, highly targeted nation-state malware. So we have our precious treasures, which are particularly interesting for publicity because they actually cause public interest. They are of public interest, and they do, in fact, not target a large group of people. So as a security company, you're not in danger to actually endanger your customers by publishing this kind of threat, but you create a lot of publicity. This is why they're precious treasures. How do you find these precious treasures? It's actually like searching for a needle in a haystack. We have these huge haystacks of thousands and more than thousands and thousands and more than thousands of malware samples each day. Depending on which report you read, the numbers rise and fall. But what is happening with all of these samples, with the haystacks, is they're being traded, they're being sent out, they're being spread. Everyone has the same sample set, or should have the same sample set, and process them accordingly. They're being tagged, they're being categorized. What happens though, when you are searching for these precious treasures that are nation-state malwares, you're not happy with the haystacks because you can't find your needle in this haystack. So what we're going to be talking about today is the needle processing. We want to find our needles. For finding the needles in these haystacks, you have various different means and options to gather your data. The most well-known one and least documented one is threat intelligence. I've been talking about threat intelligence a lot now, but let me tell you, there is no really feasible, grabbable definition for threat intelligence. Same happens with telemetry data. These are like the vocabularies you see on security vendors' blogs when saying, oh, we found this through our telemetry system. What is telemetry data? I'm going to be speaking about this in a second more, but telemetry and threat intelligence are very good sources to help us find stuff that we already know. Find indicators or use indicators that we have to find other samples to the indicators that we had. Another just recently evolved method of finding our needles in the haystack are leaked documents. Edward Snowden was the, well, let me call him shining star on this stage to leak documents to enable analysts to credibly link binaries to actors. Another way to find our needles are, of course, infected machines of people who are infected with nation-state malware. And last but not least, my favorite one and most peculiar one, the gossip. I still can't quite believe how much actually really valuable information in our business is exchanged from one person to another. Well, we think we live in the digital age. All right, let me get back to the telemetry data. I call this our endpoint wars. So telemetry data is effectively data collected from infected endpoints. To get this data, one would need an endpoint agent. So actually, in antivirus, we don't call these endpoint agents. We didn't call these endpoint agents until we read our first Gartner reports where we learned that we are actually working on an endpoint agent. So this is the antivirus engines as they were invented to detect threats. These endpoint agents are fed with threat indicators. These threat indicators are used to detect threats and to mitigate threats, and also to exchange data. So what happens when you have an endpoint agent on your machine is this agent receives data from the security company and sends back data from the infections on your machine. This works the following way. So we have our endpoint agent. The endpoint agent is fed with threat indicators. These were initially signatures. Nowadays it's IOCs and I don't know which new names were invented. So we have our indicators that are sent to the agent, and the agent sends back Q&A data. Q&A because the threat indicators need quality assurance. So these indicators are sent to the endpoints, and they're tested, of course. Not every indicator is initially live when being sent to a test system, to an endpoint system. And also, they could turn out over time to be false positives or to be high-risk indicators that need higher evaluation or whatever. So this QA data is very important for actually improving the threat indicators. What happens, though, with this data, there is information being collected from the machines, such as signature hits, timestamps about when the signature hit a certain sample, the hit frequencies, how often the sample was detected, and of course, the sample itself. So what these endpoint agents do is they test their signatures on the machines and send back the samples they detected to have the security company check what the sample actually does and if it's a false positive or not, or if it's an evolving threat or whatever. So we have this silent exchange of data. What is happening in the endpoint wars backstage? Of course, this is all evolving around signature generation testing. But what we have there, what evolved in the recent years for quality assurance are silent signatures. So security companies can send out silent signatures to test them on an endpoint and see if in a short frequency, in a short amount of time, they hit on samples in a high frequency, which would tell them it's either a very fast spreading threat or false positive. But these silent signatures can also be used, of course, for grabbing binaries and effectively lead to a certain amount of telemetry data and threat indicators, which help security companies analyze the needles that I've been talking about. In the end, of course, telemetry data in the end, but we have security products that are mostly not free, as you might know, which are still, of course, adding to the security of the person installing them, but also adding to the actual telemetry data to the value of the security vendor. Another very interesting peculiarity we have been watching the past years are the frenemies and the fungus among us, as we call them. I told you a lot of interesting data is exchanged from person to person. A lot of interesting information is treated as gossip. So what happened in our industry is that we have a lot of frenemies. So you might find yourself all of a sudden being good friends with a person which you had never expected to talk to you, because you might have information that this person is interested in. This is a very social experience that some of us might have. Anyway, you might also find yourself in a situation where people you trusted or you thought were your friends actually are more interested in the malware you have than in your friendship. So we might not get into detail here, but we have some very interesting experience with our frenemies.
Right, so, I mean, the interesting thing with a lot of the sort of the big nation-state malware campaigns that have come out is that, you know, sort of someone will release a report like, oh, we discovered this. But it's frequently, you know, a lot of this stuff is known by multiple actors prior to release. So when I started looking at Region a little while ago, I discovered that it was kind of like the worst kept secret in the threat intelligence industry, and that there was actually a variety of large companies that had known about this for years. Microsoft had definitions going back for it for a really long time. Kaspersky, Symantec, and some other AV companies knew about it. And so I was working on this. I worked on it with a variety of very smart people, and I was working on releasing it with Claudio when it got leaked that we were going to publish very shortly. At which point, I think Symantec published a report on a Sunday night, which is the first time they've ever done that. Kaspersky followed up very shortly afterwards, and we were sort of a couple of hours after Kaspersky. Now, unless you think this is not, there's no bitterness here. I'm just sort of relating this as an example of a story. But I mean, this is actually sort of one of the things. When you're looking at samples, you'll actually discover that a lot of people have them. And then there's this kind of like jostling, like, wait, are you going to release those? Or maybe I'll release those, you know, sort of. Yeah, and so it actually all gets kind of complicated. Okay.
Anyway, before we get to our big game hunting, into the big game, recently there were some very, very sad stories about big game actually being hunted down. So let me tell you, while we hunted down our big game, we actually didn't hurt real game.
So, I mean, the thing is that our industry actually forgets about Cecil. We're more interested in the gun that shot Cecil, how sophisticated the bullet that killed Cecil was, and, you know, maybe whether or not we can blame the bullet manufacturer for any wrongdoing. So, I mean, these kind of twin facets of, you know, attribution, you know, like who did it, who built it, who wrote it, who operated it, and how sophisticated is it? Like, you know, on a scale of 1 to Stuxnet, would you give this a 9? You know, it's kind of interesting because I've had really bizarre interactions with people from AV companies at conferences. So actually, I'm going to do a little test here. Like, so I used to work at Google, and Google has this thing where if they think you've been targeted by nation-state malware, they'll put a banner on your Gmail account. Are people here familiar with that? Anyone? Like, raise your hands. Yeah, a few people. How many people here have actually received this banner? Right. No, you can't do a hand wavy thing. It doesn't work like that. But well, so a couple of years ago, I attended an Arab bloggers conference in the Middle East, where a lot of people who'd done independent blogging about, you know, the political situation during the Arab Spring, and I was sort of talking to them about security, and I asked the same question, and it was actually about half of the audience. And so I was talking to an antivirus researcher who actually said to me, like, hey, where do you get some of these samples that, you know, you've been publishing? This is all very interesting stuff. And I was like, oh, you know, actually, like, people that are targeted, like, send them to me. And he was like, what? It's cheating. And I was like, cheating? How is it cheating? It's like, oh, no, you're not doing enough needle processing. Have you heard of the haystack? It's large, there's a lot of samples in it. Which I think actually sort of reflects, you know, the sort of interests of the industry, which is really not people related at all. Unfortunately, in certain situations, right, like especially in countries where rule of law is not particularly robust, countries in conflict and that sort of thing, you know, espionage is a tool that is used to enforce, you know, more kinetic things. So rather quickly, this guy's name is Taimur Karim. He's a Syrian activist. He was seized by the Syrian police. He was tortured and beaten. He thought he was going to die. And this line always stuck with me. This is a computer, by the way, that contains an image of the compromised hard drive, which contains a rat which recorded his Skype conversation and so forth. He said, my computer was arrested before me. This woman's name is Elisha Harby. She is probably unknown to most people in this audience, but you're probably familiar with this. She was actually basically Finfisher patient 0, and that she was actually the person who was like, wait, this email looks really suspicious. And it ended up on my plate, and I did a body of work with the Citizen Lab, which led to the first public attribution of Finfisher samples. Her husband, Ghazi Farhan, seized by the Bahrain security forces. No one knew what had happened to him, held for 48 days for, what was it? Spreading political misinformation, mainly through comments on Facebook. This guy, Ahmed Mansour, is a United Arab pro-democracy activist. He was giving talks about, well, democracy in the Middle East, which is an interesting topic, and he was being physically beaten after some of the talks he was given. He wasn't really sure how people knew where he was going to be. I did some analysis on his hard drive, and I found out that he had a hacking team implant on it. Have people here heard of hacking team? Yeah, I know, right?
Is anyone here from hacking team who wants to out himself? No?
You know, I'm sorry I suffer from Hackenfreude as a medical condition. But yeah, so the hacking team sample actually talks to this IP address, which was actually in a very small range, which pointed briefly to the office of the sheikh. And people say attribution is tricky. Come on. So this brings us to the case of Alberto Nisman, which some of you may be familiar with. So he's an Argentine lawyer, and he was investigating the bombing of a Jewish community center, killed 94 people, and there were sort of accusations of political skullduggery that the Argentine government had covered up Iran's involvement in exchange for oil. And he was going to bring charges against the president of Argentina, as well as several high-ranking cabinet ministers. Unfortunately, he was found dead of gunshot wound to the head under very suspicious circumstances. There were no powder burns on his hand. It was ruled a suicide, but a lot of people thought that, you know, maybe he was murdered because of the charges. And this has sort of led to protests around Argentina. It's a really big deal, and kind of, you know, it's you know, sort of a conspiracy of JFK proportions in Argentina. Now, where this pertains to this talk is that police were doing investigation because apparently he had a conversation with the head of the Argentine Security Intelligence Services the day he died. So they were trying to confirm this, so they started doing forensics on his devices. Now, this was reported in a very small Argentinian paper. This paper then said that the police had uploaded a bunch of files from his computers to an online antivirus scanner. You know, telemetry.
Haystacks.
And they published the name of the file, which is enough. So I had a look for this. This file matches one sample, and one sample only, uploaded from Buenos Aires. It is a multi-platform implant, RAT, remote access tool. This is a screenshot of the control screen. So it started its life as Fruitus, which was sort of a proof of concept Android malware. And then it got rewritten as Adwind, which became like a for sale remote access tool. Then it was rebadged again as Unrecom and continued to be sold. And it's currently doing the rounds as Alien Spy. I think like CrowdStrike wrote about it being used in targeted attacks. This sample's on Contagio. So as you can see, it'll capture your screen, listen to your phone calls, take photos, or all the sort of stuff that you'd expect from one of these types of implants. Now, you know, looking at this malware, you know, we're able to discover command and control domains and then link other malware samples to command and control domains, look at network indicators where these command and control domains were situated, and so on and so forth. Other targeting by the same actors. So this group, the people who compromised him, were targeting other people. This was the targeting lure on one of them. It's like a fake document from the Embassy of Ecuador. Or maybe the document is real, but it was definitely bearing malware treats. And so this relates to the sale of Saab aeronautic equipment, I think between Brazil and Argentina. If we look at the compilation time on Nisman's malware, it looks like they started spying on him 6 weeks before he died. His death was January 18th this year, and the malware was built on the 1st of December 2014. Network-based indicators point to actors in Argentina and Uruguay. We also see the use of hosting services in the US, Germany, and Sweden. So, could have been anyone.
Right, so now you have seen that attribution can be tricky, attribution can be absolutely not tricky, attribution can be anything. There's a general public perception that attribution is frequently done based on binaries, which is not true. Attribution is almost never done based on a binary, but based on the context of a binary. However, there's interesting cases such as like Babar, which is allegedly French government malware that I mentioned before when talking about the leaked document. This document I mentioned describes an espionage tool, a sophisticated espionage tool named Babar, which was supposedly operated by the French government to spy on individuals in Canada. People publishing this document, or people writing this document, were the Canadian Intelligence Service. So Babar was one of these cases where frenemies kicked in, and what actually happened was that the document was leaked before most of the researchers in the security community got their hands on the sample. So as soon as the documents were published in February, people were like, "Oh my God, have you seen Babar samples? Maybe I would like to have such a dropper to analyze and publish on it." However, we managed to get our hands on these samples before most others, funny enough, and analyzed Babar and figured out that Babar actually didn't come alone. Babar is an espionage Trojan out for also sorts of different contents on a machine, but Babar was not the only tool they had used. Babar was only the only Trojan that was documented in this paper. Happens that Babar had a relative named Bunny. Bunny was another Trojan, actually a scripting bot. Bunny incorporated a Lua script interpreter, which would download Lua scripts and change its behavior to a certain extent at runtime. But Bunny was not even the only relative. There were more. There was Casper, and there was Dino, and there was Nbot. So we had all these different families. And for me, like as a binary analyst, I look at these binaries and I say, okay, I see, these are related. They share code, they share mechanisms, they share tactics, they share I don't know what. This is just very difficult to explain to another person who is not into binaries, and it's very difficult to prove. So we thought there has to be a better way to actually link binaries credibly with each other, to link the binaries together, to eventually get this kind of attribution chain where you can link families with each other and link at least one of these families to a certain actor. So the idea we came up with is binary telemetry. Right. Because what you usually see is, well, let me call it flimsy attribution, where you see that analysts base their conclusions or base their public conclusions on facts that are hard to understand and hard to prove or hard to counter-prove from outside. So what we try to do is give analysts a tool to actually make a strong statement about their assumptions. You might have realized attribution and binary, anything about binaries is a misery business. You generally always want to know who wrote the malware, who controlled the malware, who were the victims, and what was the aim of the operation. Barely ever people are interested in what the binary actually does. But these kind of questions are very hard to answer from the standpoint of a binary analyst. So you have the binary, you almost never can answer these kind of questions. So what we actually want is, we want to link a binary into a context. We want to know, okay, I have this binary and I was talking to these kinds of people, these were the operators, this is what they wanted. We want the context. We can't get the context from the binary. What we can get is a link from a binary to another binary. So if you have the chance that we have a binary which is in the context, like it was with Babar, we can really manage to have the other binaries just linked to Babar, and this way link them to the alleged operators and French government. So in this case, we have a win situation. How do we do that? Let's take a step back. The term of stylometry actually comes from text interpretation. So text stylometry helps authorship attribution on pieces of texts or in pieces of codes. Source code. So what academics say about this is source code can be attributed to its author. Based on a considerably large set of samples, we can say this code was written by a certain person. There's even been research trying to link binaries, like compiled binaries, to their authors. Now there's a big set of problems with this in malware attribution. Basically, what you're interested in when analyzing malware, you're not after that guy, that person who wrote the malware, but you want the operator or the owner of the malware. So this is the first problem. The second problem is that with the classical stylometry traits, with the attributes they use for stylometry, you're not going to find in compiled binaries. So usually a compiler or afterwards a disassembler or decompiler wash away everything that the person left in a binary. So what you see, there are different kinds of attributes which require different kinds of methods. That's why we try to do datafication on our e-results. So we as reverse engineers, we see there's like handwriting. We can see this binary was written by the same authors as the other one, because it uses the same tactics and the same style. But how do we put that into data? So what we try to do is spread our domains. Usually the attribute set for text stylometry involves blank spaces, it involves variable names, it involves placement of comments, etc. All of this you don't have in a binary. So what we try to do with the binaries, we create different domains where we collect attributes and try to get big sets of attributes. The problem we additionally have with malware is that attributes are frequently faked or randomized. So malware tries to hide its origin, of course, but the assumption is that it is never possible to eradicate or falsify all the attributes that one can collect from a binary. So if we can manage to grab a considerably big set of attributes, we can conclude that not all of these attributes are faked at the same time. Our goal is to even out human influence. As I mentioned, we don't want the coder of the binary, and we don't want to classify the compiler. We want to classify the actor or the user of the malware. All right. Here I collected all the different attributes that I described now. Have a very quick look and learn them all the best. Not forget them. No, I'm kidding. These are the 4 categories that I mentioned. So we try to spread the attributes to as many categories as we can grab to be sure to not search for a human author. So we use the string constants, the implementation traits, the custom features, and the infrastructure to raise the level on which we're searching for related binaries. To not find the compiler or the human, but the actor. Here we did the proof of concept on the animal farm malware. You can see me collecting a lot of different attributes and putting them all together in spreadsheets. I particularly like spreadsheets. I'm kidding again.
Sure. Yeah.
You can see the yellow lines indicate an overlap, as I interpreted it, in the different binaries, and you can see that the different families here shown, Nbot, Bunny, and Babar, are certainly related because there's a lot of yellow. Beautiful. What does it tell us? Animal Farm gave a very beautiful case study because the binaries really come with a lot of shared traits. In the end, this helped us link them all to Babar and conclusively to the alleged operator, the French government. So we have Babar, which was linked to the Bunny malware, which was linked to Nbot, which was linked to Casper, which was linked to Dino, which was linked to Nbot again. So it's a beautiful picture, and now we can actually draw conclusions. So we have the Babar malware, which was spying. We have Bunny, which was spread through a spear phishing campaign and an Adobe Zero Day. We know Casper was spying in Syria. He was being spread as a reconnaissance malware in Syria in 2014. And we know that Dino samples popped up in Iran. So what we can finally conclude is that these malware families give away the interest of the actual actor, of the operator of Animal Farm malware. And what it also tells us is that the alleged operator, the French government, had a denial of service botnet that was running in 2009, which is why the hell would the French government need a denial of service botnet? We'll probably never know.
So it's important, and part of what this approach is designed to do is sort of firm up a bit of science and attribution, because a lot of what we have in the industry is currently what I'd call soft attribution, like a temp file with a tilde D or something like that. And so, for instance, the region is actually, the analysis we did on that is a really great example. And so this malware was linked to an attack on the European Union conducted by the US and British intelligence. Now, I mean, region actually, again, one of these not well-kept secrets in the sort of antivirus industry, it actually showed up on a private malware mailing list, maybe 9 months before publication. And that the thread was on difficult to reverse Chinese malware. And, people were posting samples and were like, oh my God, this uses this cool obfuscated technique, and this does this, and this does that. And someone posted these samples, and, I was sort of reading the mailing list and then check out this super interesting Chinese APT malware that I found. Okay, whatever. And then sort of, 2 hours later, yeah, I'm not sure that's China. And I was like, okay, that looks interesting. And so using a technique much the same as Marion describes, with the sort of Animal Farm, Baba, and Bunny and Dino, sort of malware, together with a lot of very clever people, I spent, many months sort of putting together a picture of this sort of highly sophisticated and full-featured implant kit that had many different moving components. Of course, you find this looks like it's related, and then you're trying to figure out what it does. And again, you sort of get to speak to the motivators of the actors. And so, finally we found a sample which looked like this. And so it was in a zip file. Now, as you can see, it actually contained a region sample, but it also contained a bunch of other data, which gives us binary context. And so what we have is we have the log of a forensics tool run on the system. We have procmon logs, which sort of, that is for process monitor. It's a tool for inspecting what's going on in a Windows system and so on and so forth. Now, we have the region sample, right? If we look at the other files, we can find out where the binary was found. And so this was found in a domain called BGC.net, a company called Belgicom. I'm not sure if you've heard of them. So we have the username and ID, and for those of you who have a long memory, Britain's GCHQ hacked Belgian telecoms firm. I was like, yes, attribution, although this is actually what I would call a soft attribute, right? Because it's really what you have is Belgicom was hacked by the GCHQ, you have some malware that was used on the Belgicom network, but maybe it was the French, Belgicom could have been hacked by multiple actors. If you look at the malware and that sort of thing, there's sort of a strong suggestion, but this is what we call sort of a soft attribute, right? Whereas the hard attribution came later, when people shaking the Snowden documents found some code which fell out, which was called QWERTY. Now QWERTY, Kaspersky said in a blog post, looking at the code closely, we conclude that the QWERTY malware is identical in functionality to the region 50251 plugin. A friend of mine said it better, I think, when he said even blind Freddy could see that eQWERTY is a region plugin. So yeah, this is what we call a hard attribute, in that we actually have leaked documents from the code authors, and this links to code that was found elsewhere of region, which sort of links back. And, it's exactly what Marion had a great, pretty diagram of, describing what happened with Baba. Now, of course, one of the real peculiarities of doing this type of research was that, you release research, you release papers, and of course, people who are paid to do professional espionage, there's not oh, damn, you got me. That's nice work, kid. Keep that up. You guys are probably familiar with this guy, Clapper, because he was put in a really unfortunate situation where he was asked if the NSA was spying upon millions or tens of millions of Americans, and he sort of didn't want to admit it on national television, so he sort of did the head rub and said, oh, not wittingly. Which he later on, when it came out that he'd lied, sort of said he tried to answer in the least untruthful manner possible. Now, there's actually been sort of a bunch of people that have been implicated in the production of nation-state malware that have told sort of wild lies when sort of confronted. Finn Fisher, sold Bahrain, Egypt, lied about it, they got hacked, their docs came out, found that they did. Hacking team recently ran into some trouble, as we know. They've said some stuff like this, in the past. There's absolutely no evidence that links us to these samples. And of course, I could be talking about any one of a number of cases. The lies sort of continued even after they got hacked. Here's a screenshot of their sysadmin who's like, the attackers are spitting a lot of lies about our company. It's simply not true. Don't download the torrent. It contains a virus. And of course, the ex-security lead of Twitter, John Adams, was like, no, the torrent contains all of your viruses, which you sell. Which I found this is sort of an interesting exchange, simply because Twitter? Since when do people who sell capability to nation states take to Twitter to argue with security researchers about whether or not they say the stuff they say is true? So this game has gotten really bizarrely personal. Like I've sort of been harassed and lambasted on Twitter by various people working for companies selling surveillance equipment and surveillance gear. And in fact, Hacking Team released this statement publicly about me, where they said that I was a tireless wolf crier on the issue of privacy as I define it, and then, of course, linked this to the fact that I clearly love aiding criminals or terrorists. Again, I'm sure it's just business. They only mentioned me 117 times in their leaked email archive. And then, of course, there's the photos of me and audio recordings and that sort of thing. But, again, I'm sure it's just business. I actually think they should have thanked me. Because in the leaked emails, this email, so they're meeting with a customer called Phoebe. So they use these cool code names, we can't figure out who they are. But as you can see later on down in the article, they've got a link to FBI quietly formed secretive net surveillance unit. And they say, if anything good came out of the Citizen Lab articles, it's that it brought them to contact us to see if it was true. It was way more than they expected. Thank you, Citizen Lab. It's like, wait, what? Did the FBI read one of my reports and then decide to purchase this software? Like, this game just gets weirder and weirder. Like, not an intended result. Today we've talked sort of about a bunch of peculiarities. We've discussed a bunch of the major nation-state families, hard and soft attribution, a novel approach to binary context. And I think now it's time for us to do kind of like a choose-your-own-adventure malware story, because everyone here is now experts, because that's why you pay to come to Black Hat. So let's do this together. We're going to introduce a malware family we call Cheshire Cat.
Yeah, so Cheshire Cat. We all like cats a lot, right? Especially cats on YouTube. So the name of that malware family, actually, to be honest, we came up with yesterday only because we didn't have a name for it before. We had multiple names for it before. We went through the APT numbering. We had APT 69, APT 666. We called it Firefly based on the classical approach to give malware just arbitrary name, and then we decided to stick to the CrowdStrike naming convention and call it a cat. So what is Cheshire Cat? Cheshire Cat is effectively 5 samples that we dug up with compilation timestamps ranging from 2002 to 2011, which is a kind of old malware family that has been around for a long time.
Yeah, so first thing that stands out is actually the longevity of the malware. So this is either one person or a group of people writing malware together over 9 years, which is quite a long time. If we think of other malware families that lasted that long, we're thinking Stuxnet, Equation, Regin, some of the more well-funded operations.
The oldest sample of Cheshire Cat, as mentioned, compiled in 2002, is a pretty small and pretty plain binary. It comes with some string obfuscation with XOR and searches for security products on the system as a defense mechanism, including a executable named dummy.exe. So I'm not sure which security product that is. If you could point me to a direction, I'd be very thankful. This sample is a control component talking to a device driver and sending out 2 different IOCTLs. We still didn't get our hands on the driver. If you could help us out there, we'd be very happy as well. Anyway, the sample itself was an orchestrator component which dropped another executable named msrun.exe, which would be used to launch and monitor other processes. This is used as a harness, so the launched process doesn't pop up on the security product and can actually still be controlled by the launching component. But what is actually peculiar about the sample is, whoops, I mentioned that the sample is actually prepared to run on old Windows versions. With old Windows versions, I mean around Windows 95 to Windows ME. We know this based on the APIs that were used, that were deprecated afterwards, but also because there's a checking function in there for checking the PE header of the dropped executable, searching for an NE value. Now, if you look for NE value, that means new executable, which is the binary format Windows used before the PE header format. The new executable was introduced with Microsoft DOS 4.0 and used on Windows 16-bit platforms. So at this time, we got really interested in that kind of malware.
Right, so this takes us to the next group of samples written possibly more in the modern era between 2007 and 2009. However, the implementation traits, user strings, and so forth indicate that this malware is targeting Windows NT as a platform. I mean, Windows NT seems like a reasonably old platform to be targeting in like 2009. However, as you might remember, governments change technology platforms very, very slowly. US government complaining a lot when Microsoft deprecated both NT4 and Windows XP.
Yes, so we were prepared to do archaeology there. But what is more interesting about the sample is its persistence method. It doesn't do the standard tricks, but uses a shell extension, or installs itself a shell extension for the icon handler in the Windows shell, which on modern operating systems will be Windows Explorer. So every time the Explorer loads an icon for a specific file type, the shell extension, this malware, is executed. What is interesting, though, that the malware checks on startup if it's running in the context of the procman window. So if the window of the process is running in is in procman. Now, if you look at the Explorer.exe doesn't run in a window called procman. Procman actually stands for Program Manager, which is the shell before the Windows Explorer, being introduced with Windows 3.1 and being deprecated with Windows Vista. So the samples we were looking at wouldn't even run anymore on a Windows Vista or older. Furthermore, these samples were mainly implants to monitor terminal server sessions. Also, they will install global hooks to monitor certain system activity and characters typed into the machine. And also, the sample would load a custom DLL, which again, we didn't get our hands on, so if you have any hints, we'd be very thankful. DLL is loaded, and 6 exports are loaded from this DLL. At this point in time, we felt a bit like archaeologists digging in graves.
So it's sort of less malware analysis and more malware grave robbing.
What this malware family also did, what these binaries did, just like its ancestors, used the same string obfuscation method and be very evasive when it came to network sniffers. So it would again evade from security products and just not execute certain functionality when certain security products were present. This went as far as to the stealthy network communication. So the samples were very, very careful not to tick off any security product on the machines, just by being very stealthy in its communication. It used different methods to make its way out of the corporate network, including dial-up connections, which I'm not sure if anyone in here still uses a dial-up connection in its corporate network. The samples used 9 or more CNC servers and would iterate between them and communicate to them in infrequent intervals, which we consider as very stealthy, considering that the malware was compiled from 2007 to 2009. So we have an actor which tries to be very, very evasive. As the communication to the remote server was done by injected code to the standard browser, to an instance of the standard browser, which is frequently used to bypass firewalls and local security settings. Furthermore, we have newer samples from the same family which show approximately the same functionality, but have a special module to grab security settings from Kaspersky security products. Now this is interesting because usually what we see in malware is that it tries to find settings or tries to find and evade security products of multiple vendors, but this one was just out for Kaspersky products. So this leads us to believe that the attackers writing the malware actually knew very well which environment they were infecting. They knew the operating system, they knew the network settings, they knew the security products installed in the systems. So we have a very, very targeted attack. And an interesting fact that we didn't tell you yet was the naming convention of files that would be created by this kind of malware. So all of our alleged Cheshire Cat malware samples will drop temp files starting with a tilde. So the temples will be named tilde df and then a random value.
So, you may remember Marion's binary stylometry approach from before. If we apply that to this malware, then we can discover that the wait, we've got 45 seconds left. That approach is actually really laborious. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the attribution magic 8-ball to figure out who this was. So if the audience would like to roll with me, shake the magic 8-ball, and we will discover that the person behind this long and targeted malware campaign was China. Fantastic. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. We are Morgan, Marion, and Claudio in absentia.
Thank you very much for your attention.